around noise pollution, trucks, safety. There's accidents at the intersection just this evening. We continue to see that just at length in this neighborhood. We would like to request that it be considered the impacts on wells. Just this summer with Whitestown, we had 2 neighbors who lost their wells, and we have very strong concerns that that will continue. One neighbor was out of her home almost a month. The others had to actually re-drill a well just because of retention pond work and such being done. If you guys are set that you're going to do this and impact the neighborhood the way it is, we would like to request that you delay to at least give this neighborhood a chance to work with the developer to ensure that our homes, our land, our water quality, the noise, that sort of thing is at least addressed in a reasonable manner. So that way all of us aren't losing drastic home value, which we are right now with what Whitestown's doing, you know, and the point to go with Zionsville was to avoid that. So we'd really like to see you guys do the right thing and stick by us with the promises that were made when we annexed in.
Thank you. Next up, Brian Heidelmeyer. I believe that's...
Hello, my name is Brian Heidelmeyer. I live at 4020 Snaffle Bit Road in the Saratoga subdivision. And pretty much everything that Dawn has mentioned are pretty much my concerns as well. I am pretty familiar. And other than that, I just want to say that I'm firmly against this whole development and this aspect. I think there's room for development to be put into that area. I just don't think it's this type of a building. I think there should be more of a transition from this type of warehouse, huge commercial building, and have kind of a transition into a residential area to neighbor residential homes. And not only just us in this small subdivision, but by the plans that they're projecting and the roadway that they're building and stuff, it is very clear to me that they're putting this off at this is going to be a dead-end road into a cul-de-sac, which that's just temporary as far as I'm concerned. I'm a firm believer in that they're going to try to continue to build farther down the road, and they're going to enclose us on the other side of our neighborhood, which is also going to affect other neighbors' homes that are farther down the road. So where is this going to stop? It's got to stop somewhere before it affects all of us and all of our neighbors in that area. So, thank you.
Thank you.
I have a question real quick. Can you speak to I don't know anything about wells, but what a retention pond has to do with the water table and how it affects wells? Can you speak to that?
Well, some wells are only so deep, and when you start digging deep retention ponds, your water table in your area is always, your water's going to travel to its lowest spot. So just like Whitestown dug a retention pond just down the street from our house, they didn't really dig a new one, but they've added on to an existing one. And when they pumped that retention pond dry, so they could actually go in there and dig that retention pond out, that is also directly related, I believe, to our neighbors' wells going dry. So it's just a natural flow of water is always going to flow to the lowest spot. And I honestly think I see a difference in quality of water that we are seeing at our house this year compared to last year. Now, I don't have the education in the system, you know, behind me to prove that, but some things are just learned just from observing.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Next up, Craig Triscari. It's my best effort.
My name is Craig Triscari. I'm at 3270 Paddock Road, also in that subdivision area. I'm going to add to some of the things that were already said here. as pertained to the wells, we did see some of the wells run dry when they were pumping out some of those ponds in those areas. And they have bermed over some of the ponds that were once in that area as well. I don't know where the water flows. I haven't seen an impact study that they did on the well water, but we have seen some of the impact. We also have right now with this plan, our community will be have berms and ponds, or retention ponds, on 3 of the 4 sides of our area. And as discussed before, we believe that the extension is going to go completely around the housing areas in that area. I try to go around Zionsville to see what you guys do to mitigate putting a 1 million square foot warehouse on a subdivision, but I couldn't find one in Zionsville where you actually had that example, and I looked. I've talked to the lawyer for the developer. He's actually was helpful in communicating to our group. I couldn't talk to the mayor. I'm a veteran of foreign wars 4 times over, and it was harder to get a face-to-face with the mayor than it was to get Sunni warlords in Mosul, Iraq. But so I'm going to say it here. The berms that we talked about, we wanted them to go to a little higher than 10 feet because we have 10 feet in the other berms. We're looking at probably close to 15 feet. We're not looking at a fence. We're looking at a decorative sound barrier because it's about 250 feet from houses where they're going to have staging areas and where they're going to have vehicles backing up. And you hear that sound beep, 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 beep with the forklifts coming in and out. This is a 24-hour service. This is going on for 24 hours, and right now the community is getting bombarded with those sounds. So there has to be a sound wall that goes throughout that area. We talked to water issues. There's security issues that we're concerned about as well in that area now that you're exposing that entire community on that flank and that side to industrial individuals, especially truckers that are going to be parking and sleeping in those areas 250 feet from our residential homes. Trees, we talked to trees, and they're going to try to find 9 to 12-foot trees, but we understand that that might not be the case. They might only be able to find 6-year-old or 6-foot trees because of landscaping issues. We're looking for a berm that has trees that are densely populated in that area, not decorative. We're not looking for decorative in there. We're looking not to see and hear anything in that area. And then we also talked about potential for trees and other berms in the Whitetown area that they've promised us and they didn't provide us. I would ask you if you're predisposed to approving this for the money, which I understand you get 3% versus the 1% from our community. You are going to impact our community. You are going to take money out of our pockets. But I would say postpone this until we can finish negotiating with the developer and get things in writing, because we've already done this rodeo once with Whitestown, and we did not get anything based off of what they promised, and we don't want to have the same thing happen again. Thank you.
Thank you. Next up, Neil Rohrig.
My name is Neil Rohrig. I live at 3271 Paddock Road, again in the same subdivision, the Saratoga subdivision. Really just adding on to everything else that has already been talked about. From the aesthetic standpoint, when Whitestown put the water tower in, they approved the Love's truck stop, they bulldozed a woods. It wasn't a big woods, it wasn't a huge woods, but it was a small woods, which was a sound barrier for us from the interstate. Now I can read the gas prices from Love's truck stop from my back porch. So, that's not the type of aesthetics that we're looking for. And we just don't want to get the type of development that Whitestown gave us from the back of the other side of the subdivision as well. And, to Craig's point, I worked in the trucking industry for 38 years. And those buildings are 24 hours a day. They are going all night long, And if you go down through there, most of those on Indianapolis Road, those lights, those spotlights on the side of their buildings, that spot all the way across their parking lots. So it's not just sound barriers that we need as well. We need something to block the lights from those buildings as well. So thanks for your time.
Thank you. Next up, David Bertain.
Thank you. My name is David Bratton. I live at 4090 Snaffle Bit Road. And I guess my question is, how did this development of a distribution center come to be in our backyards, at our back doors in the first place? You know, there's 73 acres out there. We have two, I'll call them warehouses, just south of there. One's set empty since summer, the other ones are finishing up. We hear the noise from it all day long. Now this one's just going to be in my neighbor's backyard. And like everyone else said, that comes with the lights, the noise. My understanding is there's going to be something like 94 truck bays, if that's correct, on one side. We're talking about, if that's correct, that's almost 200, 180 some bays for trucks in our backyard. There's a lot of places to build something like this. And the realty company could put a lot of things in that space without dropping a bomb on us with this 55 foot building in our neighborhood. Like another gentleman said, you can't find where that's been done anywhere else around here. I've never seen it anywhere. But so of course that's the concern. There's just all kinds of things wrong with this. There's accidents all the time at that. It's not even an intersection. It's just a two-way stop on Highway 267 and Indianapolis Road. We've had 2 fatalities in the last couple of years there. There's just, the traffic is terrible. You can't get in and out at certain times of the day. There's just nothing right about this development in this area, even if there was, even at this time. I know Mr. Price does a good job of selling it and making it sound good, but you can't make a silk purse out of a sow's ear, and that's what this is. It's a sow's ear. There's nothing good about it. Thank you.
Thank you. Next up, we have Jill Bratton.
Hi, thanks. My name is Jill Bratton. I live at 4090 Snaffle Bit Road with my neighbors who have spoke eloquently, and I appreciate that, and I second what they've said. I also want to speak a little bit to what the development side of this. They say that this goes with what's already out there, and they're right. There are 2 warehouses already there, 2 warehouses with a lot of truck bays. So we already have that. So now to put more on top of it is just extreme, I feel. When I looked at Zionsville's 2014 amendment to your comprehensive plan, I think if I read it right, it said that this should be a transitional area. As we're residential and as it's farmland, you try and keep a transition from industrial to residential. Now I know the developer's going to say that there's a gas station going in there, but when I drive into Zionsville, I see a gas station, a get-go, beautifully done, beautifully. And there are shops around it, and there's neighborhoods around it. It looks great. We would love to have something like that. Not a big warehouse with 94 truck bays, that are working 24/7, and we get the noise, in addition to the 2 others that are already up there. So I just ask that you reconsider this, and I know that tax funds are always something that you think of in a comprehensive plan, and I certainly understand that. But I think that as you see on the other side of 267, there are small office buildings, small 1-story, not 55 feet high warehouses. That would be a good transition and might be something to look for. So I appreciate your time. Thank you.
Thank you. Last up, Darren and Heather Cleveland.
Mr. Trial, may I make a request as well? Due to the incident, the accident, we were delayed at the intersection that enters our neighborhood. Would you accept an additional few speakers?
Do you have your card filled out?
Yes, sir.
If you want to bring those up.
Thank you.
Hello, Heather Cleveland, 4075 Snafflebit Road. Our property is directly adjacent to the farmland. Along with my neighbors here, I do not approve of this development. I did bring some photos. I know a couple of you have had the chance to visit our neighborhood. I met Jason out in front of my house today, and Tom was there last weekend. But I do have some photos in case you can change your mind on how wrong this is. So if you'd like to pass them around. And then also some notes showing exactly where the Smith Cemetery is, how close that is from our property, the power lines, the warehouse that's actually a little further than the warehouse that's going to be built, supposedly. So that's all I have to say. Thank you.
So Darren Cleveland, 4075 Snafflebit Road. So in addition to what the other folks have talked about, I think the biggest concern, especially being in the back, right, adjacent to it, noise. We've heard a lot about the noise, absolutely, right? I think you guys get that. Just one, lights has been a big thing for me. Look out my back window. The construction lights consistently are always on. Looked out this morning, you know, they're running equipment back out there, bright lights. I never had to turn my lights on the back. Or I did have to turn on. Now I don't because already it's already shining in there. So, and the second part is really the traffic. Probably takes another 5-10 minutes to get out of that area now because of the amount of semis coming in and out of that area. On top of, let alone the semis already parking on the roads around there because of lack of space at the Love's truck stop. So additional traffic and things like that come into play they are a concern. So, thank you.
Thank you. Next up, I'm sorry, Tony, I can't make out your last name, but Tony?
I get that a lot.
I'm Tony Theophanis. I live at 4065 Snafflebit Road, same subdivision. What's been said has been said. We all feel the same way. I think you know how we feel about it. My property would be next to Darren and Heather's. We'd be seeing a warehouse directly out our back door. I would like for all of you to think about this. If this were your neighborhood and it was coming your way, like it's coming our way, how would you feel? I think you'd be asking the same questions. We're a rural residential area, and it's quickly becoming not that. And it's a shame. I think all our neighbors have pride and ownership where we live. We like where we live. And it's changing rapidly, not for the better. So, again, if you just think about it and say, hey, if this were me, how would I feel about it? I'd appreciate that. Thanks for your time.
Thank you. Steve Christian?
evening. Steve Christian, 4055 Snafflebit Road in Saratoga subdivision. I'm a neighbor of Tony's. I want to go on record saying I oppose the rezoning. You've heard all the reasons. I agree with those. If you should decide to go forward with this, I think there's some substantial mitigative measures that need to be taken into account with the berming, landscaping, protecting us from the noise and lights and things that everybody else has mentioned. Thank you.
Thank you. Last, we have, I believe it's Ryan Bell.
Good evening. My name is Ryan Bell. I live at 4070 Snafflebit. I'm more on the millennial end of the curve than my neighbors, but however, they do tolerate me there in the neighborhood. I'm one of the few families in the neighborhood that now has kids. And I want to paint a little bit of the picture that I see when I drive down the road, which may be a different vantage from theirs. When we had an unfamiliar car within our neighborhood, 2 neighbors had sent out an email to our network that we have already established. And somebody had already made a phone call to the police to make everybody aware that there was just an unfamiliar vehicle, not as suspicious, nothing invasive. It happened to be a contractor that was having a cup of coffee before he was working on a house around the corner. But that's a neighborhood that we have kind of grown together to make, was one that look out for your neighbor, look out for what's going on around you, be informative. Nobody's very aggressive. Nobody's gotten up here jumping, screaming, or opposing this. You know, I'm a business owner. I understand forward-minded thinking. I understand what the gentlemen are trying to attempt to do to develop this land. I understand the city's perspective on the tax base. I also understand the perspective of all my fellow neighbors. And so it really kind of boils down to, if this does proceed forward in passing, what can we do to legitimately mitigate the impact? I think that's where we really have to sit down and sit across the table from whatever ends up being there and come up with some real forward-minded approach to, here's a neighborhood that within the last decade is now surrounded in different ways on all 4 sides, whether that be by different land acquisitions from cities in the county. Lebanon came up to the rear 400. Zionsville acquired us. Whitestown's on the other side, where before it was just Boone County, a little 2-lane overpass, where from the top of the overpass, you couldn't even see our neighborhood to the woods that Neil spoke of. So here we land today. So I think the impact of how we handle this is what's really critical. And that's where we're really asking, you know, the team that's supposed to be on our side, as well as the forward-minded business developer side, is how can we really collaborate, work together, extend out our hands, and legitimately come to some solutions that preserve the value of our properties that we, as some of you have been through our neighborhood, really we take pride in. And so again, I conservatively ask that we really together look forward to how we're going to accomplish this together. And I would say that the water issue is something that probably ought to be, of the emergent issues, something that we really need to be progressive on, because if we end up with contaminated water or lack thereof water altogether, that's going to do something catastrophic to our properties. And that's something I think we ought to be, with a water tower in our backyard, pretty easily solved. So again, I appreciate the time to speak tonight.
All right, thank you. All right, next up on the agenda is, in the old business, is a consideration of the 2019 salary ordinance for the town of Zionsville. Second reading, this is ordinance 2018-22. Deputy Mayor Mitro.
Thank you. As we noted to you at the first reading, this is our yearly salary ordinance. It mirrors identically to that of the actual budget that you adopted earlier last month. Essentially, it holds everything as far as benefits steady. The number of holidays are the same. Salaries are the current salaries for 2018, with the performance review possibilities of up to a 2.5% to 3% raise, depending on performance. Again, the salaries themselves were a part of the budget and are just carried forward to the ordinance. If you have any questions on that, I'll be more than happy to answer.
Any questions? Entertain a motion.
Move approval?
Second.
Got a first by Counselor Suarez, second by Counselor Spies. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. All right. Next up on new business, consideration of an ordinance to rezone approximately 73.3 acres of agricultural zoning district to the rural light industrial zoning district. Ordinance 2018-23. Mr. DeLong?
Thank you. Good evening. Tonight on your agenda is a recommendation that's been forwarded to you by your Plan Commission, which is a favorable recommendation of a vote of 4-2 related to the rezoning that the interested parties have spoken about this evening. This is a rezoning to a light industrial I-1 rural classification for 73 acres, and the petitioner is here to speak to the petition.
I have a quick question for you, Mr. DeLong. Let's say if this zoning approval passes, what's the next step for, as far as planning for what could potentially go there? What would the petitioner's next steps be?
The petitioner's next step with a certification and approval of the petition this evening would be to move forward with the appropriate entitlement pursuits, be it the development plan, other county highway, or the town of Whitestown state highway conversations, any drainage conversations that need to be had with the county drainage board, but they would be filing for additional petitions and approval from various agencies.
Okay.
And some of those would include public hearings.
All right, so there would be additional opportunity for the neighbors and the petitioner to negotiate.
Your council may best answer the negotiation word that you used. I mean, the development plan process is, right now the rezoning is the legislative conversation where there is an abundance of discretion. The development plan process has a very limited amount of discretion, and that is exclusively with the Plan Commission.
All right. All right, thank you.
Certainly.
So, in simple language, it's over. We approve this, it's moving forward, right?
That would be my understanding.
Okay, thanks. I have a question that came up in the discussion about transition areas, and I admit I'm weak on this, but one of the speakers earlier mentioned the fact that at some point in the planning, or countywide planning, because I'm not sure at the time that in 14 it wasn't part of the Zionsville, but that area that they're thinking about developing was talked about being transition area into the light industrial. Do you know what the difference is, or can you explain to us what the difference is?
Certainly, this area would be looked at as how would you design the land use for this particular site so to allow a transition in density, intensity, action items between the residential single family to the north and the additional industrial development to the south. In 2009, the county's comprehensive plan talked about what the interested parties mentioned this evening, and certainly that certainly didn't foreshadow or foresee the intensity that is there today. Certainly the town, in order to enjoy planning and zoning jurisdiction over the area, adopted the county's comprehensive plan, and no additional updates have been made by the town to that. So when the Plan Commission was reviewing this particular proposal, they're also considering other planning information that was out there, which includes the Whitestown Comprehensive Plan, which does show some level of transition as well. They have recommendations of different intensities of residential development on this property. And so from the Plan Commission's point of view, I believe what they were looking at was the amount of transition that's being proposed on the site plan, the buffering as something that was going to be promoted as a part of this development, which may not be able to be achieved if this area were to be rezoned to residential. I would say Quail Run would be a great example where you see power lines through a site that's multifamily, but they've built buildings on either side of those power lines. And the petitioner's request, they're proposing to leave anything north of the power lines undeveloped as a buffer, which is in essence, the transitional area the Plan Commission was considering.
The power lines are kind of on the other side of the property from where the houses are. I mean, I went out there and that's kind of what I saw from the concerned neighbors' backyards? Was it the buffering area would be against their property line, and there would be berms and ponds and trees, fence, correct?
Correct. I believe that's what's in the petitioner's materials for you this evening.
Is there any other type, I'm just curious, because I don't know, are there other types of development that would be considered transitional? And again, people mentioned, whether it was gas stations or lower profile buildings, even if they were commercial buildings, lower profile commercial buildings, is that normally part of what would be considered transitional development opportunities?
Well, the transitional development opportunities, first and foremost, I think would target some level of residential, be it attached product, some level of density that could transition from the single family to the industrial use to the south. So that would be another type of transitional use that you can see there.
All right. Thanks, Wayne.
Certainly.
Other questions?
Yes. Mr. Long, during the hearing process, were there discussions about the containment of the hours of operation, light contamination, and so on? I saw within the document there were some concessions made there and some commitments that were made in regards to lights pointing down and so on. But having come from the world of concrete, whenever we operated plants and things of this nature, we would look at limiting hours of operation or perhaps some other concessions. I didn't know if that was part of the process.
There definitely were discussions related to the lighting, down lighting, heights of the lights, light management, specific to the time and 24 hours versus limitation. I recall there being, some level of conversation on that topic, but I don't believe there was anything requested by the Plan Commission limiting that, nor was that something that the petitioner provided any self-limitations on.
Is there any information shared or requested insofar as traffic impact or water studies?
Not water study, but certainly a traffic impact study was provided to the town. The town's engineer did review that study, provided comments back to the petitioner.
So there's really, until today, there's really been no public discussion as to the impact on the water and well quality?
That is not typically a part of the zoning process, and that was not discussed up until this moment that I'm aware of personally.
Could I ask Mr. Price to approach?
Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Don.
If you don't mind speaking to the hours of operation and the water concerns.
Sure.
Will you state your name just for the
Absolutely,
record?
yes, thank you.
Appreciate it.
For the record, my name's Matt Price, and I'm the attorney for the petitioner, Van Trust. And my address is 10 West Market Street in Indianapolis. Let me speak first to the water. That was discussed during the Plan Commission meeting a little bit. And what we answered at that time, and it's still our belief, is that the detention pond that we show along the northern property line of this parcel is purely for stormwater. And so we should not and would not impact any aquifer associated with a well. In other words, there's not any depth of this detention pond that imaginable that would impact a well, at least in this part of Indiana, as far as the depth of the aquifer. And I've not heard of anything like that in Boone County occurring with regard to the installation of a detention pond. So that's the way we kind of answered that at the time. Yeah, Mr. Schuler.
Go ahead.
Matt, any concern that the runoff from the facility going into the detention pond would have a negative impact? I mean, I know the trucking business, you're gonna have a lot of oil and things like that, and it's gonna run off into the detention pond. Is there concern? I don't know how that gets addressed, but.
Yeah, so the site would be equipped with stormwater detention, and that's also not only quantitative with regard to our detention facility, but it's also qualitative. So it would have the ability to also filter out any kind of contaminant that would come off of a truck, anything like that. should be all self-contained within our property.
Within the development, and I've thought about it, unfortunately, from my background, I have a little bit of this. Will you have like these oil water separators where the runoff runs into first before it runs off into the pond? Or?
I believe it would within the facility itself. I'm not sure, Ross Nixon, I don't know if you want to speak to in our parking lot. While he's walking up, Ross is our civil engineer with American Structure Point. If you want to say your name.
Good evening, Ross Nixon with American Structure Point 7260 Shadeland Station, Indianapolis. Specifically addressing your concern about oil and contaminants, we are required to meet during the design stage the town's requirements for stormwater quality, and that does include separation of oil and water from stormwater. And there's multiple ways of doing that. There's oil water separators if the use dictates that. There's what they call water quality structures that actually swirls the water and separates the oil from the actual water. And that's done prior to discharging to the pond. So there definitely are requirements in place that we would have to meet that address that exact question.
Matt, again, around the water question, and trying to think probably not as scientific and more neighborly. Was there any evaluation of what it would cost to run utility water out to the neighborhood where then they could do some kind of long-term hookup with the utility company? And we looked at this at another project that I was involved in. You might have been involved in too, I can't remember, but where we were going to run utilities by the neighborhood, and then the neighborhood could get hooked up, and the utility would charge them, $5 or $10 a month for 10 years. But it really was a big benefit to the community. I don't know if you guys look at that.
We did not, as far as hooking up to the public water, the municipal water supply that Whitestown operates. This facility would be hooked up to that municipal water. What we focused our efforts on was providing the buffer area, and that to us is the transitional piece. From building to the north property line, it's well over 550 feet, in excess of the project just approved within the last month as far as proximity to a dwelling. And what we really think, and when we hear some of the frustration with regard to experiences with Whitestown and some of the land use decisions that have been made there and enforcement of their commitments, we think what makes this facility ideal is that it does answer the question of what goes here, and with a buffering that is substantial. 2 buffers, one on the south side of the pond, one on the north side of the pond. It's 10 feet tall. We did agree to install trees that were 8 feet at planting, which we think is the largest tree that we can find readily available to plant, so that they'll be of substantial size on the day of planting. And then we also agreed to a fence, a solid fence, to provide some additional screening from the uses. We think that the Plan Commission, in evaluating the criteria for the rezone, concluded that it was the highest and best use. And we think that a denial of a case like this would call into question what the next level of use is. And those uses include what's permitted today. And when you look at the list of uses that are basically adjacent or within the shadow of the interchange and surrounded on 3 sides by commercial and industrial properties, we think what that leads to is other transportation-oriented, intense land uses, either through a rezoning or through what's already permitted. And I think that's part of what Mr. DeLong was describing, is that what this project does is it does provide for that transition, whereas if a permitted use comes in, like a transfer station, a compost facility, fertilizer storage facility, an animal breeding facility, things that all avail themselves of transportation infrastructure and can utilize the underlying agricultural zoning, then the transition, we think, starts to be called into question. May not be the same need for transition because it's permitted use at that point under the existing zoning classification. We think the market has looked away from those uses because they weren't viewed as the highest and best use anymore, based on this residential subdivision being there and the surrounding development that's more industrial in nature. So that's why we think this is actually the good fit. And then to Councilor Suarez's point, we have made commitments about lighting, limiting the height of lighting both on the building and on standalone poles. Any decision about future development as you move west would be completely up to the town, whether that's appropriate or not. This does not cause that development to occur. It would require Plan Commission approval and council approval for any step like that to be taken. So we really view this as a discrete end piece and filling in a blank in a way that's respectful of the community immediately north. And so and we think that's what the Plan Commission determined when they met when they met last month and evaluated many of these same concerns.
Matt, any discussion on kind of sound remediation? That seemed to be a lot. What I heard about was that trucks would be kind of lined up on the access road and parking all night, running their motors and engines.
We did. We think that what our analysis showed is that the best sound buffering was a combination of things, which was a combination of the berm at a considerable height, 10 feet high, with a 6-foot fence, and then the dense vegetation. We agree that the trees need to be big and densely planted along that property line in order to assure, both from an aesthetic standpoint and from a noise standpoint. Now, I will say, this has caused me to do some more just personal experience. I went to the FedEx facility the other night, turned my truck off, rolled down the windows, and when you get to a 300-foot distance from the trucks, even as they're rolling through the FedEx facility, you can hear 465 to the south a lot better than you can hear any truck. And so we think that at our distance from the truck bays and the roadway, complemented by that buffering, we basically eliminate the noise concern and certainly eliminate the light concern with the way we've limited ourselves with regard to lighting as well.
So I'm sorry, can I?
It's a 10-foot buffer plus the 6-foot?
It is.
Okay.
Plus the 8-foot trees.
Yeah, 8-foot trees.
Yeah.
And just as a quick follow-up to that, do you have, from what you're saying, the truck base and the operations side of the warehouse are going to be as far from the residential area as construction permits? Is that what you're?
That's right. What we've done.
So you've bermed
Yep.
and.
The second.
Because I'm trying to.
Sorry.
To the resident's point, if the truck bay is close to the water and close to the trees versus on the complete other side of this. So I'm trying to understand what mitigation efforts you have done in order to address their concerns.
So what we did is that the site, and I can, if it helps, I've got some packets that have some photos that I could show you that we had emailed digital copies, but I can give you a hard copy.
You can just hand it to me.
It's the same one we
Yeah, we have that digitally, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm going to show you.
Pull it up.
We need to.
So will the bays be on both sides of the building, both the north and the south?
Yes, bays on both sides. Yeah.
Is there a company that's wanting this built that will be a tenant, or a company that's going to be here and that's who's building it, or?
Well, I appreciate you raising that. These buildings are being built in anticipation of an unknown tenant. So we don't have a known occupier today. If you drive around these facilities, both on the west and east side of I-65, you see a variation of uses, all the way from an hours of operation, all the way from Amazon facility, which is used basically 24/7, it's very busy, to facilities that are not that active during the off business hours at all, or zero. And I mean, anecdotally, you can go out to the west side of the interstate, and after business hours, you can hear the lanyards hitting the flagpoles more clearly than you can hear any other noise. So it's very quiet at times when it's off business hours. The Amazon facility on the east side of 65 is busier. Now, I would still say that inside your vehicle, you can't hear any activities going on there. If you're 10 feet away and you roll down your window, you can hear a truck idling. Some trucks, when they're unloaded or being loaded, are not idling at all. Some don't even have the engine part of the truck even attached at that stage. So it's not like there's 85 trucks running 24 hours a day, with every single truck bay filled at the same time. It's just not how most of these facilities operate. To answer Councilor Suarez's question, what we did is we pushed the entire site south. I mean, that's the way we accommodated the neighbors to the north. And we made it so that the buildings are all south of the property line. So there's no bay, there's no entryway for a truck to interface with the building that is any closer than 567 feet from the property line, which is nominally almost double the separation between truck bays and the closest house associated with the Becknell project.
So what's
Almost
the
2
distance?
times.
What's the distance from the nearest trucking bay to the residential property?
So I'm sorry, 550. I think I said 67. 557.
Okay, thank you. I got confused there. No, and I know, for example, with the cement plants that we used to run, we used to have to turn off the back beeping from the trucks during nighttime hours. Is that something you all have discussed? Is that even legal anymore? I don't know if the laws have changed on that. I have to say it because I don't know.
I don't know the answer to that question. I know that when I was out listening for trucks, I did hear the beeping noise. If you could, if you were next to the facility, you could hear it. I think for probably safety standards, that's something you cannot, under today's rules, perhaps require them to turn off.
Sure. I know when, this is a long time ago, so I'm sure the rules have changed, but I would encourage, that kind of noise pollution was definitely something we dealt with on a regular basis, and I certainly comprehend that concern from the neighbors because, at 2 o'clock in the morning, it's annoying to hear that truck backing up. So in appreciation for everything you've done in mitigation already, I would encourage that discussion to continue so that those concerns are definitely allayed. I'm sure there's a way to address that. I know we did. So within the law and within the rules of operation, I'm sure there's got to be a way to do it, be it that, certain operations are constrained during those nighttime hours and so on, so.
And what we've tried to do is make it so that with the mounding, the fence, and the vegetation, that we basically block that noise off. When you sit out at this property, and one of the property owners mentioned it, the noise you hear already is the interstate. It's in close enough proximity to the interchange and the vehicles are traveling at higher rates of speed. That's the dominant noise. You do not hear any other noise out there relating to the facilities themselves operating. What you hear is the hum of the interstate. It's kind of a low hum.
With regard to the fence you mentioned, is it a fence that helps reduce the sound transmission, like the barrier fences near the highway, or what is it?
It's a solid fence. We have not. It's not like an NDOT type of fence. That's not what we had envisioned. We view it as serving a couple different purposes, which is it'll aid in some of the noise reduction. Our study and research showed is that the vegetation is a highly effective way of barring. I think even the one gentleman mentioned the woods block the interstate from where the Loves is now. That's been our primary focus and investment. The fence kind of adds a decorative treatment and certainly eliminates any views.
Were the trees, you're considering pine trees or that?
Yeah, I think pine trees, yep.
Yeah, I say if you need some examples, you can go to my neighborhood in Fox Hollow.
Yep.
Our pine trees were 10 or 11 feet high when we moved in, and now they're 20, so they've done a nice job. I don't even know what kind they are.
And we're talking 8 feet at planting, which in my experience that is the upper end of what's available commercially.
Other questions?
One of the people that spoke, that said they'd like to see that berm at 15 feet. Is that an option? And then a 6-foot fence and trees on top of that?
We did discuss that with them. We don't feel like that's a realistic option just because of it starts to encroach into the additional space on our property. And we think that also starts to create something that's almost kind of, abnormal looking at that point, that without necessarily gaining anything from certainly not an aesthetic or a noise abatement. That's really the driving reason why we don't think going taller is a good answer. Berm heights in the 3 to 4 range are I think even 6 feet on the last proposal. On the Becknell proposal was 6 feet across the street from homes. So we're already, 40% higher than that here, and happy to do that. And then what we did do though, in speaking with the neighbors, was add a second berm between on the south side of the ponding area to help block off any noises, going across the detention pond. So our berm system is twofold. There's a berm on the south side and a berm on the north.
Yeah, and I know from cement plant experience, it's not so much the height, but it's that double structure that really does prevent the noise from traveling from one place to another. So I applaud that. I think that's good. I also want to echo what Councilman Schuler just said in regards to having the actual wall, the fence, be more of a construction that would be noise abating versus ornamental.
Can I mention one other thing too that was come up with the neighbors, and we took this to heart, is that our commitments are enforceable by each homeowner and have a fee shifting provision so that if they incur an expense because we failed to do something, that the owner is responsible. And that's in direct response to some of the concerns about the way some development proposals have been handled in Whitestown, where a commitment was made but apparently not carried out, and there's not a mechanism for them to enforce it that doesn't involve them incurring costs. So we've built that in. So when they ask for it to be in writing, we agree wholeheartedly. That is the benefit of being in Zionsville, is that you get robust commitments that are in writing and they're enforceable. And so that's what we've tried to offer here as the best approach.
Kind of go back to the fact that you're going to be running utility waters to the facility. Is there any chance you can figure out what it would cost to, get it run by their neighborhood so the neighborhood could get theoretically linked up to the water, and maybe that's an olive branch? I don't know.
I can tell you, Rafe Webster, you want to come up? It's always a good idea to put your client on the spot when you get a question like that. We have not investigated that to date, and so I don't know where the water's even coming from specifically, but you may be able to.
My name is Rafe Webster. I'm with Van Trust Real Estate, 700 Yard Street, Suite 300, Columbus, Ohio. To answer your question, Mr. Schuler, so we'll be extending. It's obviously Whitestown controls the water. We'll be extending water down the extension road or the access road that comes into our property. How from that point, how you would get it to the north, I'm not quite sure, and then run through their neighborhood. We have not looked at it at this time, and frankly, I would say that that's probably a bit of a excessive burden to place on it to extend water to that neighborhood.
Any other questions? All right. Thank you, Mr. Price. Any discussion amongst the council members?
Matt, I do have one question before you step away. So the concern from a lot of the homeowners is water. That's no concern. Of little concern, obviously, to you guys from the development perspective, because you don't feel like it's going to be an issue, right?
Do not. No, sir.
Could there be a water impact study, or you made reference to the owners not being responsible for certain damages and things of that nature? is there any way to I guess maybe get a before and after of the well water out there and to make sure that we're taking care of those folks if there is something like that happens?
I don't know. I mean, my concern is that what's been testified to is that their water has been impacted to date, and it's not clear what's causing the difficulties with the wells. So it could be something with the well itself rather than anything that's happening around them. It puts us in a difficult spot. I'm reluctant to say that we would indemnify anyone for it because I think the causation, saying who caused that, would be a trick bag to get anyone into who is making the petition. I can just say I have never heard of. I think we're talking about two different things. One is the surface water that we're seeking to retain, which is rainwater, and they're talking about water that for their wells, which is groundwater in an existing aquifer. It's not impacted necessarily by the rainwater that we're talking about. So I don't think there's an interrelationship between those two issues.
You don't think, you don't know.
No. No, we're not going to do that. Sorry. We're not going to do that. Stop, or you'll be escorted out. That's it. All right. Go ahead.
As far as a study, Mr. Nixon's firm is an excellent engineering firm. We might be able to do some further analysis on their individual wells, as we go forward to determine to assure that our construction techniques during the development plan don't impact their wells. I mean, that's something we could probably look at.
So we do this all over the place as far as develop property and that kind of thing. In our experience, and we have industrial product and large parks that we've developed adjacent to properties that are served by wells. We haven't necessarily ever had an issue with any of those properties. I suppose there's, we're going to do everything from a stormwater standpoint and everything we do that's going to meet all the requirements of the drainage board and how that needs to be done. The well thing, I mean, we can drill monitoring wells on this particular property to see where the aquifers are, so to speak. But that could vary for each different, from the subdivision standpoint, not even everybody's well may be at the same elevation. I have no idea. As wells that are more shallow maybe are more impacted by what's going on in the surrounding area. I would echo what Matt said in that it would be, from a causation standpoint, it's difficult to say what's impacting what. Groundwater, generally, and Ross, you're the engineer, so you can slap me if I'm wrong, but I think it generally follows the surface water as far as how groundwater flows, but that's not always the case. In this instance, I think surface water is flowing to the southeast, generally. So, I mean, we can do some things up front from a standpoint of trying to understand where the water levels are, but before we start digging the pond and that kind of thing. But other than that, I'm not sure that there's, and from a long-term standpoint, I mean, the building should have there really wouldn't be any impact on the wells. I mean, the wells are going to, frankly, as well, again, Ross, correct me if I'm wrong, but would fluctuate based on where the water levels are naturally going up and down as you hit droughts or excessive rainy periods. So.
Yeah. Just a couple points I wanted to add to that. I guess for starters, stormwater detention ponds are pretty common in residential subdivisions, are they not? I think if you live in a subdivision that's constructed since probably 1985 or after, it's been a requirement for that stormwater code. So if detention ponds and stormwater management directly impact wells and residential homes, I feel like that's a broader issue that, you know, we wouldn't be trying to figure out right now. Not saying there aren't issues at this subdivision, but as stormwater management surface runoff relates to those wells, we generally don't see a connection in the development that I've been a part of. Ponds are normally 8 to 10 feet below the water surface, and although I don't know specific well depths in the neighborhood, they're most likely much deeper than 8 to 10 feet below the surface.
Right. I live in a rural area that is all well, and in theory, a detention pond should not have an impact on the well, unless the pond is. How deep are we talking here on the pond?
Well, again, we haven't designed and engineered anything, but 8 to 10 feet is generally the depth that you try to get your ponds to. And that would be my best guess on where we would be on this site. And the other thing is, you want to keep these ponds wet and hold water on a permanent basis, so you generally get clay-type soils to line the pond, which help keep that water in place and not have it mix in with groundwater, if at all possible.
Other questions?
I was going to mention one other thing, talking to Mr. Webster, is that as far as permitting the extension to the water supply, the municipal water supply, we are agreeable to committing that we would install and locate our water line on the property and grant the Saratoga development such easements as they would be needed, that if they wanted to tie in and distribute it, like some neighborhoods do, that they would have access. In other words, we wouldn't preclude them from tying into the water supply. And we'd facilitate that as far as granting of easements and the location of the water line.
Bringing it close and then let them tie in.
Correct.
That's significant.
Just a quick question, Matt. The property I'm looking on Google, the property north and east of that, right, kind of in that intersection there, do you have any idea what's going there?
Yes.
I mean, it looks on Google, it's like an empty lot. I mean, it's just dirt.
It is. So the property that's immediately north of us, and north and east, yeah, you're right, is that's a gas station. It's a 24-hour-a-day gas station that was approved last December, I believe.
Okay.
All right.
And just lastly, I'm back to my fence. Can we get your commitment that it's going to be more than just a privacy fence and more of a sound mitigator?
Well, from a NDOT or that, we're not necessarily considering constructing a concrete barrier. Our notion was, I mean, the fence frankly started from more of a decorative fence that was really just an aesthetic that you could see through and everything, to I think the subdivision preferred more of a privacy type fence. Again, the cost of I don't know what a concrete sound barrier, like
a panel, some sound panels, something like that.
Right. Again, I think that's difficult for us to agree to at this point. You know, the way we look at it is with the berm, again, the 10-foot berm, a fence, and really the amount of landscaping and the pine trees. You know, frankly, we can put in pine trees as well as deciduous trees so that it just doesn't have to be a row of pines. We would be willing to put in other trees as well. We think that that is an appropriate manner to really provide screening and buffering. And again, we're as Matt mentioned earlier, I mean the building itself is over 500 feet from the property line. So we're a substantial distance from the property line.
Oh, no.
Yeah, that's what I heard too.
All right. Just, sorry, we're running late here. Any other questions from the council? None? I'd entertain a motion. From anybody?
Maybe a question, what would happen if we deferred this for a couple of weeks? Seems like a lot of people have a lot on their mind here, maybe not.
You can make a motion to continue.
Well, and maybe I'd rather ask the folks asking, because I don't want to, you know, I'm a pro-business guy, and I've already told I've met with the people out Saratoga, and I said, hey, you know, I'm usually pro-build, but I feel like there's a lot of questions here. Would a couple of weeks continuance be a problem for you guys? That's my question.
It would not be, and what we've talked about here tonight, I wanted to kind of recap just real quick, is that we have offered, pardon me, the 8-foot trees and the covenant to replace the dead trees, which of course we would do. And then we mentioned the water line location. Those are 3 substantial things that are not in your commitments today. Mm-hmm. And so I think it would be useful for you and for the community. And I will say that we have had cordial and professional discussions with many of the individuals there. I think we would probably all benefit from an additional 2 weeks to help get this as tight as we can get it.
And you mentioned the access to the water hookup that you're going to have. If there's any way to get feedback from the utility that's providing that water, what the additional cost and how that might be handled, working with the community. If they, you know, like I said, I've seen it before where usually it's not like everybody has to pay $1,000. It's everybody has to pay, you know, $10 over an extended period of time. Maybe somebody from the utility could help, you know, provide some additional information where you all might be able to get together with the neighborhood and say, hey, we can do this, and they might say, hey, that's great.
And the fire department.
And the other good things that you've already brought up to help them, so.
I'll do that.
Now, if we are, so will you be amending the commitments with the additional commitments you made this evening? And then if so, does it need to go before the plan commission again, or?
No, I don't.
Or we can amend here? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I just want to echo the fact that I think everybody's agreeable to the conversation we're having, and I echo Councilor Schuler's offer to extend this for 2 weeks to tighten this up a little bit, because I don't think anybody here is against this. We're just not quite sure we can't see this get better.
Is 2 weeks enough?
It is. Okay. I believe it is.
So I'll
It'll
make
give us
the
some
motion
chance.
to continue this to the next council meeting.
Got a motion by Councilor Suarez.
Second.
Second by Councilor Schuler. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? None. Continue for 2 weeks.
Thank you, Mr. President.
And I'd like to thank
Thank you.
Matt and the folks from the
Me too.
development company taking the time to answer a lot of questions. And I'd like to thank the neighborhood for showing up and speaking to us.
It makes a
Appreciate it.
difference.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you. The next meeting is Monday, November 19th at 7:30 a.m. right here.
So it's AM, yes,
Yeah.
yes.
The mid-month meeting's always in the morning.
So
It's
how
not-
do you facilitate some dialogue collectively?
If Matt, you
We
might
can go-
take
we'll
him
go
out.
out.
You guys go outside.
We got here in the lobby.
You take them outside.
Yeah.
Take it outside.
Hey, what you do with him out there, he's a lawyer, so we don't really care.
All right.
But he's pretty feisty, I'd watch out.
Tough crowd.
Thank
All
you.
right, thank you. Next up is a consideration of a resolution to proceed with land acquisition for the North-South Connector Project. That's Resolution 2018-17. Mr. Lance, you are up.
As we move forward with the design on the North-South Connector Road project, we move towards the land acquisition phase, and state statute requires the fiscal body adopt a resolution for properties where we may be compensating owners in excess of $25,000. We're required to identify those potential properties. Not every property you see on this ordinance will ultimately be over that threshold, but they have identified as possibilities. And then you state two things. One, it's your intent to purchase those for the good of the project, and that you will follow state statute by obtaining two appraisals and not compensating for the property anything more than the average of those two appraisals.
All right. Question? Yeah.
Did I hear you correctly in saying that these are possible properties, that these are not for sure going to be?
Correct. These are through the early, pardon me?
They're all going to be over $25,000.
Oh, no, not necessarily. These are the parcels that can potentially be in excess of 25,000.
But these are parcels that are going to be for certain needed to be acquired.
These are absolutely necessary for the project.
That's what I
yes.
wanted to, and all of these property owners have agreed to this? Or this is just the beginning?
No, this is a first step in the acquisition. After this, we will complete all the appraisals, and then we will tender offers and enter into negotiations.
Have they been alerted this process has begun?
They are aware, yes.
And what is the process by which they can perhaps not proceed with the sale of their land?
The term eminent domain is often confused with condemnation. Eminent domain is the set of laws that allows a municipality like us to obtain property for the good of a public project. We will, with all parcels involved, whether it's in excess of 25 or not, we will obtain at least one appraisal, if not two or more, and then we will present an offer to each property owner for them to review. They have 30 days to respond to that offer. If they fail to respond within 30 days, we can consider them negligent or not going to respond, and we can then proceed with condemnation, which is the compelled or forced sale through the courts. So we make all attempts to negotiate with every property owner for an amicable sale of the property. We have, with the Zionsville Road property, we've actually done 6 different parcels through court-ordered mediation, and we were successful in 66% of those. So we make every effort to negotiate a sale. Ultimately, if we cannot come to terms with the property owner, that it is turned over to the courts for condemnation. At that time, the court appoints 3 appraisers who work together to have one value of the property. Then that dollar amount is deposited with the court, and then it's up to the property owner to either take that or further contest it. But that does give us interest in the property. We can proceed with the project.
You memorized that, didn't you?
Once in a while, you hit on something I know well, so it just kind of rolls off the tongue.
Wow, that was well done.
Well done, yeah.
Yep, okay. So all of these people after this meeting will be receiving notices, or is this the first reading?
Yes, at some point in time, they will be receiving offers from the town.
Is this a first reading then?
This is a resolution. There's only one.
Oh, didn't catch that, thank you.
Who pays for all those appraisals?
The town does.
Yippee.
Yep, that's part of building public works projects.
Any other questions? If not, I'd entertain a motion.
Move to approve.
Second.
Get a first by Counselor Spies, second by Counselor Hopper. All those in favor? Aye. Opposed?
Aye.
I believe that was 4-2. So we had a opposition, Suarez and Schuler. Is that accurate?
Siri agrees.
Yeah, Siri agrees apparently. Just wanted to make sure we had that correct. All right, so motion passes 4-2. Thank you. Other matters, we've got approval of claims. Call for a motion to approve.
So moved.
Second.
Got a motion by Counselor Suarez, a second by Counselor Spies. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Motion carries 6-0. Need a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
Got a motion by Counselor Hopper, second by Counselor Suarez. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? None. Motion carries 6-0. Next regular town council meeting is scheduled for Monday, November 19th, 2018, 7:30 a.m. at the town hall council chambers. Thank you.
Done. That was a tough one.
Josh leaves you with this one?
Yeah.
This is actually not that
What are
bad.
you talking about? He would have been done in 14 minutes.
Exactly. That's what I mean. He knew he wouldn't break the
That's
this
right.
would totally blow the record out of the water. He skated.
That's exactly right.
Yeah. Yeah.
And you're saying the longest day of the year, people are doing like first days.
Damn kid's been in school for 3 months, full boat, and they're already calling it recommendations. That's what that ringing was during the things. I apologize. I forgot to turn off my phone.
Quick question, I'm sorry. I guess I could come to you.
Years and years ago, I resembled that.
You were one of those guys making the calls.
Lance, could we have you at the principal's office?
No, these people are all aware that it's going to happen. They just have to know by
Is there something we're supposed to be signing?
Yeah, that's what she wanted. I just haven't been, yeah, 'cause I said, yes, ma'am, they're all over.
Backlog.
So all of the
Hey, how
things
you
are
doing?
where the.
Hey, can I put in a reference for my
They've all received multiple.
young friend, Mr. Keen is in here.
Yeah. Has anybody indicated like a?
Yeah, this has been going on for years.
Good kid.
Oh, yeah.
Neighbor.
Yeah.
Yeah, he's a cross country.
That's why I wanted to know, how do they know?
His name is Tyler.
I happen to know multiple people on that list, and I never.
I'm just curious, I'm not saying that.
No.
Soccer bet right
My kid was in the sun, but we were good buddy.
Well, Sam was amazing. I mean, you know, only half the microphones work. That was fine.
John, he's alive. He loves it. Still loves it. 25 years later. He was the one I was carrying.
Yeah, we had the same.
He's still full of piss and vinegar. And he's the greatest guy.
They wait that long and we're all only on for 5 appraisals at one property. The first 2 and then the second
I mean, he worked out. He's athletic. He's a lot of fun. Man, I just
Halloween night.
so I told him about Dad. I go down. So, free, quarter points. And then I was actually with the shit. Real estate. He did 30 years and retired. Those 3 people in Los Angeles, San Francisco together.
Okay,
One number. He said,
okay. I thought it was gonna be 3 additional separate proposals, appraisals.
Yeah, no.
Ah, like 3 at the time.
They wanted to stay local. Ones that we prepared. The court.
I remember when we went through this at the trail.
Yes. The court appraisals. Yeah, I mean, it's.